So I'm really changing directions with this one because usually I just do random lighthearted videos. As you obviously know from the title because you clicked on this when you saw it, I'm going to go over one of the most disturbing true crime cases I've ever heard of. Today we're going to be covering the Junko Furuta case. Also, I want to specify that I'm not receiving any ad revenue from this or profiting from it in any way. I simply think that this story deserves to be told as it can raise awareness and be learned from. And of course, before we start, there are a few trigger warnings. This video will contain graphic violence, abduction, bodily harm, and sexual assault. This case begins in Misato, Saitama, Japan on November 25th, 1988. It is known as one of the worst cases in post-war Japan. To give an overview of the case so you can decide whether to click off or not, skip ahead if you don't want to be spoiled. On the day that I previously stated, Junko Furuta was kidnapped, beaten, raped, held captive for 42 days, and sadly murdered. Forgive me for any mispronunciations, but the perpetrators were 17-year-old Jo Ogura, 16-year-old Shinji Minato, 17-year-old Yasushi Watanabe, and 18-year-old Miyano Hiroshi, who was the leader of the group and was known to have ties to gangs, sex crimes, and the Yakuza, which is the Japanese mafia. Junko Furuta was born in Japan on January 18th of 1971. She was a high school student at Yashio Minami High School and was saving money for a graduation trip by working part-time jobs. She got good grades and was often described as being pretty and bright. She refrained from drinking, smoking, and drugs. And at school, she was quite popular, and it looked like she was gonna have a bright future. It's said that all of this stuff happened because she was asked to date Miyano, which English articles state, and Japanese articles state that it was Minato, so I don't know who it was, but she was asked to date one of them, and she turned them down. Okay, so finally we can get into the actual story. On November 25th of 1988, she was seen riding her bike around 8:30 p.m. by Shinji Minato and Miyano Hiroshi, who were walking around town together, just hanging out, I guess. Minato was ordered by Miyano to push her off of her bike and flee, so he could swoop in, help her up, and offer to walk her home safely in order to, manipulate her into trusting him. He did manage to gain her trust on their way there, which made it easy for him to trick her into entering a warehouse where he would then threaten to kill her. He then raped her and then again at a nearby hotel. After having done this, he called Minato and the other two perpetrators and bragged about what he had just done. He was asked by Ogura to keep her in captivity so that he and many others could have their way with her. The group that they were in had previously abducted and assaulted a young girl who they eventually let go, but she never reported the incident, as she was terrified of what the Yakuza might do to her family if she told anyone because of their connections. And I don't blame her, because if telling somebody about what happened would get, my mom killed or my sweet Wiki Bennis, then I don't know if I would risk it. So I don't blame her. But it still is really sad that, I think all of the guys that did this are out of jail now. They should be locked up forever for what they did. I think that night at around 3 a.m, Miyano took Junko to a nearby park where he and 3 other boys threatened to kill her family if she tried to escape. They learned her home address from one of her notebooks and forced her to go to Minato's home where he was living with his parents. When they were home, Junko was forced to act like his girlfriend, but they stopped pretending once they realized that his parents would not contact the police. And I know you might think that that's horrible of them, but apparently he had previously been violent toward them, and they were fearful of his connections to the Yakuza. Junko's parents reported her missing on November 27th. Miyano had forced her to call them on 3 separate occasions to convince them that she was safely staying with her friends and had just run away in order to hinder the investigation. She was held captive by the group for 40 days, somewhere around there, where she was ceaselessly beat, tortured, and taken advantage of. They would often invite other men to participate. On the night of November 28th, Tetsuo Nakamura and Koichi Ihara were invited to the home. I am bad at pronouncing names. They went upstairs where Junko was being held and drank cough medicine in front of her, pretending that it was a drug. They acted like they were high in order to frighten her. She attempted to escape in fear, but was ultimately stopped by the group. Minato's mother went upstairs to check on them upon hearing the commotion, where they assured her that everything was fine and they were only messing around. The boys began to gang rape Junko immediately after his mother left. The whole time, she was unresponsive, staring at the ceiling unblinkingly in an unconscious state. This would happen on a daily basis for the rest of her life. I am going to leave some details out at this part because I'm not comfortable discussing the majority of the things she was forced into doing. I would recommend watching another video on this case if you want to hear them, though. Eleanor Neal makes some very interesting and descriptive true crime videos, as well as Bailey Sarian, who unfortunately doesn't have a video on the case, but I would check her out anyway, because she's cool. As they listened to music, she was forced to dance naked in front of them and do other insanely inappropriate things that I'm not going to mention. When she couldn't walk due to the extent of her injuries, she was forced to sleep outside on the balcony with very little clothing, even during the winter. She would even sometimes be forced to sleep in the freezer. They performed more acts on her, which I'm definitely not comfortable discussing on YouTube, and force-fed her excessive amounts of water, milk, and alcohol, which was pretty much the only thing that they would feed her. It got to the point of her not even being able to keep down water and would immediately instead puke it up, so she was getting nothing. On top of this, she was forced to inhale paint thinner and smoke multiple cigarettes at one time for their amusement. They repeatedly burned her legs with lighter fluid. By the end of December, Junko was being fed nothing but milk and was dangerously malnourished. She became confined to the bedroom as she could no longer walk at this point. She lost control of her bladder and bowels. Her face was beaten in so badly that her brain had shrunk from the trauma and her nasal cavity was full of blood. Eventually, it was so bad that she would often beg them to just kill her, to which they refused every single time. Towards the end of her life, her beauty had been destroyed and she began to emit a rotting smell, causing the boys to lose interest in her. On January 4th, 1989, Miyano lost a game of mahjong and poured lighter fluid on Junko, then set her on fire as a way to take out his anger. After Junko failed to put out the flames, she became unresponsive as they continued to beat her. They lit a candle and dripped hot wax onto her face, then placed 2 small candles on her eyelids. She was even forced to drink her own urine. After she was kicked, she fell onto a stereo unit and began convulsing. As she bled out in front of them, they covered their hands in plastic bags and continued to beat her, along with repeatedly dropping an iron exercise ball onto her stomach. She passed away after roughly 2 hours. After realizing what they had done in fear of being charged for the murder of Junko, they wrapped her lifeless body in blankets and shoved her into a travel bag, then placed it in a 55-gallon drum and filled it with wet cement. Around 8 p.m. that night, I believe, they disposed of it in a cement truck located in Koto, Tokyo. While police were questioning Miyano for the kidnapping of another woman and her son, I think, he thought that Ogura had already confessed, so he told them all about Junko and where to find her body, but they were really confused, like, what are you talking about? But then they ended up finding the drum that contained her body and were able to identify her by her fingerprints because she was so mutilated. On April 1st, 1989, everybody was soon arrested. They all pleaded guilty to committing bodily injury that resulted in death rather than murder, and they're all out of jail right now. So that is the end of today's story. This took forever to do, so I don't know if I'm going to do another true crime video, but if you want one, comment below what you want the case to be, and I probably will, because I have nothing better to do. So, subscribe. Bye.